Coming up on This Week in Space, is the space bromance dead between Elon Musk and Donald Trump? Also, ispace fails to stick its landing on the moon, and the NASA budget request is out, and it is awful. And Casey Drier from the Planetary Society is going to explain it all. Tune in.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 164, recorded on June 6, 2025. Goodbye, NASA. Hello and welcome to another edition of This Week in Space, the Goodbye NASA edition. There's a question mark after NASA. I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief, Badass Magazine, and I'm joined by my fellow distressed NASA observer, Tariq Malik, editor-in-chief at space.com. Hello, my friend.
Hey, Rod. Slow week, huh? Slow week this week.
Yeah, it's a real snoozer. Good God.
That's it. Show over. No space news this week.
In a few minutes, we will be joined by Casey Drier, the chief of space policy for the Planetary Society, who has some thoughts on these on these recent happenings and has had some thoughts for quite some time, and they're good ones. So we're looking forward to that. Before we start, I know you haven't forgotten. Please don't forget to do us a solid. Make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast because we're counting on you. And if you're here, you probably already have. But if you haven't, shame on you. You're going to the Woodhouse. Like and subscribe.
Shame. Puppy shame.
And now a space joke from Daniel Hart. And I had to find one that was neutral this week because I just couldn't bear to do another NASA basher. Hey, Tariq.
Yes, Rod.
Do you know what's making waves across the Earth in space news?
I don't. Is it gravity waves? Gravitation?
The moon!
Oh, I get it. It's a tide joke. It's a tide joke. I get it.
It's maybe tied for our worst joke. Now,
I don't know. Is it with your sense of humor? It ebbs and it flows, my friend. That's another tide joke.
Now, I've heard that some people want to defund us when it's joke time on this show, but you can help. Send us your best worst or most different space joke at twit@twit.tv. Until then, we're gonna just carry on. So, I almost don't want to touch it with a finger, but let's do some headlines.
Yeah. Headline news. Oh, I was early to this.
Well, according to some of our loyal listeners, if you come in early, it might actually be on time. So you're probably right in sync.
Wow.
Gosh. Wow. The bromance is over.
Yeah.
Musk and Trump have experienced a rapid, unscheduled disenfriendship.
Disenfriendship.
So where does one begin?
Who could have predicted it?
Oh,
right?
yeah. Except for almost everybody.
Who saw this coming? Right.
So amongst
except
all the
everyone.
other trauma of the last few weeks, Trump and Musk have a break in their bromance. Yeah, which results in Trump saying, and correct me if I get the order wrong, hey, if we really want to save money, we just cancel all those expensive contracts with Elon Musk and his dumb companies. I don't know why Biden didn't do it because everything was Biden's fault, with Musk saying, fine, I will decommission Dragon, and parenthetically, although he didn't say it, you can walk to your damn space station. And then throw a little more dirt onto it. Musk said, hey, wonder why you're not seeing the Jeffrey Epstein files? It's because Trump's in them. What are you doing?
It was a turn, man.
And after that, actually, Trump kind of took the high road, which surprised me.
Well, so it actually started early. So this, by the way, we're recording this on a Friday, and all of this happened like within the space of like 4 hours, like yesterday, like on Thursday. It was like I was sitting there watching Japan land on the moon, which we're going to talk about in a bit. And meanwhile, and meanwhile, like this whole, like the richest man in the world, and I guess you could say the most powerful man in the world, the president, are going at it on their different social media things. And it started actually in a press conference with German Chancellor, Rod, where there were questions, and Trump said that he was very disappointed in Elon Musk because Elon Musk had seen his big, beautiful budget bill, which of course Musk has been criticizing all week long, since he left government on Saturday. It was like less than a week, man. And Elon said it was false, like called him out right away, and told said that Trump was ungrateful because it was Musk that got Trump elected. And then that's where it all just kind of devolved in spectacular form, in front of like the entire like Twitterverse and like internet world.
Well, and honest to God, I mean, it's not intended to be a politically charged statement, but it was a bit like watching a couple of toddlers throw oatmeal at each other. It's like, nah, you're a stinky pants. No, you're a stinky pants 2 times over.
A lot of people thought it was great. Like a lot of people were like, look at how fantastic this is. Look, they're finally fighting. Like we all were hoping.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's still not good for the Republic.
Oh my gosh. It's just like, this is the face we've chosen to show to the world, about how we work. But it raises a lot of questions because I was just talking about it with the space.com team today, and where we ended up last night.
Boy, that must have been an interesting pre-press conference you guys had.
Oh my gosh. Well, so consider the purpose of the commercial crew program that led SpaceX to develop Dragon for NASA's crew transfer. It was NASA, in the wake of the Columbia accident, realizing that they had only one assured way to get to space, that was the Russian Soyuz, and even then that wasn't very assured. And so they would like to have their own U.S. independent access to space, not just one, but 2 vehicles. So that's where Boeing came in. And that's why we would never be dependent on anyone again for anything, because we would have our own way to go. And cut forward 5 years, which is, we actually just hit the 5-year anniversary of SpaceX's first crewed flight with Dragon, the Demo 2 flight. And SpaceX is right now NASA's only U.S. independent access to space, because Boeing, is off back trying to recover from the Starliner flight and get ready for, I guess, the next one, which is sometime next year. And we're in the same place where he could take his toys and go home. And then what do we have, right? So we don't have an Orion that we can launch whenever. So
right.
It was a very big illustrative issue that we're kind of back in the same issue where we were way before. So,
well, and my 2 favorites from today, Trump, I'm not even thinking about Elon Musk, and then putting up for sale the red Tesla he bought.
That's right. In March, he just bought that car. So
yeah,
you think it has a bumper sticker on it that says, I bought this Tesla.
I bought this before Elon went crazy.
What does Elon do with the key to the White House that Trump gave him last week? I don't know.
Drop it from orbit, perhaps?
No.
Actually, I think you should weld it to the side. If it's metal, you should weld it to the side of Starship and use it for a reentry test.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah.
So
wild stuff.
I don't think the story's over. Everyone keep an eye on it, because everyone's mad about that bill, the budget bill, which we're going to talk about in a bit too, I think. So.
iSpace strikes out again.
Yeah, this is disappointing.
So, we're watching this. I thought they put together a pretty good media show for the landing. This is the Japanese company who's trying to land a private lander on the moon.
Not to be confused with China's iSpace. They both spell them the same.
Well, except that China's has a capital S, but yeah.
Oh, there you go.
And this was a company that started as a group that entered the Google Lunar X Prize competition in 2013. That's right. Which trundled along until 2018. Wasn't able to give an award because nobody could make it. Oops, a little harder than we thought. And there went $30 million. But a handful of companies, including Japanese iSpace, continued on. And this was their second attempt. And doggone it, same thing twice, right?
Yeah, same, but different, I guess. I'm not trying to make a joke there. It is very disappointing, and they were very upset. But Resilient, which is kind of the name of their spacecraft, iSpace in Japan, had built their second Hakuto-R moon lander, and they tried to land one of them in April of 2023, and they failed during the descent because of issues with the laser rangefinder, the thing that says how far the ground is to the spacecraft. And so they thought that they had learned from that and incorporated fixes in this vehicle. And also yesterday, when all this stuff with Elon Musk and Trump was going down, they were trying to land in Mare, Frijoris, in the far north of the
cold
moon.
Sea.
Yeah, the Sea of Cold. That's right. And they got down to about 192 meters during their final braking burn when something happened. They believe that either there was a lag in the data from the laser rangefinder again, the thing that's telling them how high they are.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that lag, the spacecraft was going faster than they thought it was going. And then it just augured in and hard landed, right? Which means crashed in the surface of the moon. Or the spacecraft was going faster than they thought, and that caused the rangefinder to lag. They don't know which came first in that, and they're trying to figure it all out. And they hope to figure it all out fairly soon because they want to follow this up in 2027 with not one, but 2 missions using a new type of lander called Apex 1, which is actually twice the size of these ones and much more capable. Meanwhile, lost on this flight was a small rover for the European Space Agency called Tenacious. It had a shovel on it to scoop up lunar regolith in a demonstration for NASA. So they probably won't get that CLIPS money from because they lost the spacecraft. And there's an investigation underway to really try to pinpoint from the final telemetry like what went wrong, how to avoid it on these future missions, and how to proceed. But to your point about them being sad, the CEO of the company said very specifically when asked the question that it was not a time for crying. They actually have to, buckle down and figure out what happened because they want to succeed and they are committed, if not for just themselves, for the 80,000 investors and supporters that have helped make the mission possible.
80,000. Wow.
That's what they said. Yeah.
That's almost a quarter of the people that were boosting for Apollo back in the day. Okay, let's go to a quick break and we'll be right back. So Jammer B has weighed in with an interesting thought. He said, can't Trump just nationalize SpaceX? And I suppose he probably could, but I can't imagine Musk not sabotaging it if that happened. Steve
Bannon wrote last night while all of this was going on. Steve Bannon, right? That's the guy, right? The old advisor. That they should seize SpaceX immediately to secure the space thing. So it's like it just got well. And then of course Elon backed up.
They'd get to Hawthorne and find an empty hangar, right?
We didn't touch on this, but at the end of the day, Elon said, yeah, everyone calling for cooler heads, they're right. We won't decommission SpaceX. It's like, I don't know,
So this is a piece I thought was kind of interesting. It's not a big news item, but the Launch Act.
Yeah, I'd like you to talk about this because you seem more familiar with it. I just learned about this about half an hour before the show.
You did. So Senators John Cornyn, Ben Ray Lujan, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Rick Scott, and Mark Kelly of Arizona introduced a bill that would streamline licensing processes for commercial space companies, opening the way to a boom in rocket launches. Get it? Boom in rocket launches?
Well, let's hope it's the good kind and not like the bad kind.
So, people in the industry, especially launch providers, have been complaining a lot about the regulation red tape that they have to go through. Loudest amongst them, SpaceX, although, given what they did at Boca Chica, which is go in there saying, yeah, we're just going to launch little Falcon 9s here. Oh, wait, we're not going to say it, but we're going to launch Starship. And oh, wait, by the way, it blows up with the power of a moderate yield nuclear warhead. And oh, wait, by the way. So I can understand why people there are a little disgruntled. On the other hand, we support what Elon's doing there from a distance because it's easy for us to say so because we're not living there with the smells and the bangs and the crowds and all that. But it's important work. You kind of wonder why they couldn't find like a really crappy little island off the coast of Florida somewhere and say, okay, we'll just buy the whole thing. Yeah. But they didn't. So they're in South Texas.
I think it's Huh? Oh, go ahead.
So what I don't know whether this would have I don't think this would have anything to do with the other problems they have, like with Fish and Wildlife, which are some of the hangups, but it would streamline, presumably FAA clearance, which has been an ongoing problem for them.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually the Senator John Cornyn also put out a blast actually right before we started taping that was kind of picking out the big beautiful bill and like saying how great it was for space exploration, which was also kind of weird. So this seems to be like a dueling narrative that's going on for this, because at the same time, are we going to talk about the Senate reconciliation bill that Ted Cruz put out?
Oh yeah, well we should. I didn't put it in here, but we absolutely should because finally some pushback, and I suspect it'll be gentle, semi-apologetic pushback, but pushback it is, because there's districts that lose a lot, for instance, if SLS gets canceled when they're suggesting, which is after the first moon landing, whenever that may be, whatever decade that may be in.
For people who didn't see it, late yesterday, Ted Cruz revealed the Senate reconciliation bill that they have put together, at least to start discussing as an answer back to the House Big Beautiful bill that includes the NASA budget request that would gut the science, which is kind of what we're going to be talking to Casey about today. And that reconciliation bill includes restores funding for Space Launch System, increases NASA's budget by $10 billion, includes funding for Artemis 4 and Artemis 5, the missions that were canceled in the Trump NASA budget request.
The missions were canceled, but the use of
the use of that's right.
Yeah.
The use of SLS, pardon me, was canceled. Includes the Lunar Gateway, the space station, which was canceled, and other things.
And excuse me, but I'm not sure I know of anybody at the moment other than Ted Cruz that might be crying over the loss of Lunar Gateway. I mean, obviously the contractors, but it's always been a bit of a force fit.
Yeah,
the lunar program. They built a rationale for it, which to some extent was built around the fact that the initial upper stage for the SLS is too weak to get into a proper lunar orbit, and we'll build this station, and we got parts left over, and blah 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 blah. It's a little bit of a square space station into a round hole,
and it does give all of the flight controllers that work on the space station a place to go after the space station is retired. I mean,
something to do.
I'm sure that's part of it, right? So maybe not all of it. So.
All right, let's move on to it's the 60th anniversary of the first U.S. spacewalk, which was the second spacewalk in history. Astronaut Ed White, who sadly died in the Apollo 1 fire in 1967 and 1965 during the flight of Gemini 4, was it?
4, yeah.
I think.
That's what we have here.
Gemini 4, commanded by Jim McDivitt, opened his hatch in that very small space capsule, stood up and drifted out. He had a little nitrogen-powered maneuvering handgun jet, and it didn't work very well. But he was out there for, I think, 15, 20 minutes, something like that, and just having the time of his life. And Ed was a big athletic guy, so getting out of that capsule was a treat, because he had actually, to pass astronaut qualification, had spent hours the night before jumping up and down to compress his spine because he was too tall for Gemini. But anyway, he got out, had a great time, and towards the end of it, Chris Kraft, who was the head of flight control, was getting a little agitated and said, "Okay, tell him to get back in." And it took them another, I think, 8 minutes, 10 minutes to get him back in. They kept calling up the orders. For the first couple of times, I don't think McDivitt was receiving him. Then he was, and he said, "Hey, Ed, it's time to get back in." And he's like, "Huh? I can't hear you. What? No, I can't hear you.
I'm in a tunnel.
Right?
I'm in a tunnel."
Yeah. And then finally, he said, "This is the saddest day of my life." So he was clearly digging it. He was floating out at the end of a long tether, which both kept him attached and carried electricity and air to his Gemini suit. Now, the big question about this, of course, amongst space aficionados, one of the big questions has been, if the suit ballooned up too much, as happened with the Soviets and their earlier attempt
with Alexei Leonov.
Yeah, and he had trouble getting back in the capsule. Had that happened with Ed White, what Leonov did was release some air from his suit, which is a very dangerous thing to do, but it worked. But had it happened to White, and the Gemini being as small as it was, what do you do? And so the story has been circulated for decades about, they had a pair of snippers stowed away, and McDivitt's instructions were to snip the line and leave Ed to re-enter on his own and close the capsule and come home. I've read a lot of accounts of this. I've still seen nothing definitive. This is a bit like the Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories. I've seen nothing definitive one way or the other, absolutely, but I tend to fall on the side of probably not. But it's an interesting story because...
You are the historian.
Yeah, well, quote unquote. But it would suck if you were the guy in the driver's seat and you can't get the passenger back in. And it's like, I guess we'll just orbit until we re-enter as a unit.
I got a question for you about Jim McDivitt. Yeah. Based on the fact that the Gemini hatch was open and therefore the entire capsule was exposed to space.
Right.
Was Jim classified as the second American spacewalker, even though he never left the capsule? Because it's all vacuum inside, and that's what the SpaceX SpaceX
true.
Polaris Dawn people were talking about.
Well, don't get me started on who's an astronaut. I mean, they were definitely astronauts.
We're talking about who's a spacewalker. Does it count as a spacewalk if you never leave?
Here, hold on a second. Okay, I'm a spacewalker now. Yeah, it's kind of like the who's an astronaut.
Because you held your breath? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Sorry, that was a very bad thing for people on audio only. Let's
move
on.
I don't get it either.
Let's move on because I don't want to get hung up on who or what is an astronaut. You have an item here about Mark Corno.
Tell us in the comments or emails if you want to hear an episode that is just about what is an astronaut right now. Because Rod and I have been talking about this in the background. We even talked about it. I talked about it to Jerry Griffin recently in April. But if you guys want to hear about it, you won't want to hear about it. We'll get people on to talk about it.
When were you talking to Jerry Griffin?
Well, he was at NEAF.
Okay.
The NEAF dinner. Yeah.
I spent the weekend with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he among many others at NASA have been very kind about this conversation. An astronaut, somebody who flies to space. What space? Well, anything higher than 60 miles. Wait, no, 50 miles. No, are you taking the international definition or the U.S. Air Force definition or NASA's definition? Yada, yada, yada. It goes on.
At dinner, the debate was...
Just me saying, astronauts, when I was growing up, were heroic people who trained hard, tended to come from the military, knew how to be pilots, had survival training, blah, 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 blah. And, that's
steely-eyed missile people.
Well, if you remember, no, you wouldn't. But when I was a kid, nobody else in the room will remember this. When I was a kid, on comic books, they used to have a picture of this big muscular guy flexing his arm, Charles Atlas, saying, "I'll make you astronaut tough in just 6 weeks." So we all set away for his little booklet, and it told you to attach a string to a chair and yank on it and stuff to become astronaut tough. It didn't work in my case, but that was kind of the image we had then. It was all male, all white, not the right way to do it. But yeah,
let's slot that in for an episode because we had a good debate at that dinner about contributions to society and the body of science that is all as merits, and I think that we could easily pack an hour or more into that. So,
well, and we're giving an award at the ISDC to two researchers, one of whom flew on a Virgin Galactic flight and took an experiment up. Now, it's always a little weird to read about these experiments because it's like, what kind of zero-G experiment can you do in 6 minutes? But it was a plant biology experiment where he took a number of vials loaded in his suit, almost like one of those alchemists in Tolkien land who throws little bottles of stuff, and during the flight he activated them, and apparently that's actually enough time for them to do whatever kind of germination or what they were researching to do. So it was a valid experiment. So I'd call him an astronaut. But anyway, let's talk about this astronaut who died at 76. Sad.
Yeah, Canada's first astronaut, Mark Corno, has died, and the first astronaut for any country is always someone to celebrate, and Mark Corno, is no exception by far. I mean, he was a career astronaut for CSA. He went on to be a foreign minister, but he died this week at age 76 after an illness, which is quite sad. But he flew in 1984 on his first flight on the Space Shuttle Challenger as I believe a mission specialist, if memory serves, measuring atmospheric pollution and water vapor, according to the New York Times here. And then he flew 2 more times on Endeavour, and I think they were both in 96 and 2000, both on Endeavour. And then he ended up leading the Canadian Space Agency in 2001 before shifting into politics for the country, which is actually something that other Canadian astronauts have done too. And I just, we thought actually it was one of our listeners here that reminded us that that he had passed, and we just thought we would take a minute just to recognize Garneau's contributions, not just to Canadian spaceflight, but spaceflight as a whole, and international cooperation as well, because without the Canadian Space Agency, much of what NASA and other partners have done in space would have been much more difficult, because they helped build the literal tools that then went on to build the space station and used on many space shuttle flights too, with the original Canadarm.
That's right. It wouldn't have had arms if not for them. And Corno was featured in probably the best film ever made about the shuttle, in my opinion, The Dream is Alive, which was an early IMAX show that was released just before the Challenger explosion. So it was Walter Cronkite narrating, very optimistic. Oh, routine access to space, how hard can it be? So it's a little unrealistic that way, but visually, if you get to see that in IMAX anywhere, and it doesn't play very often anymore.
And his autobiography, just came out last year. So
that first launch is a real tearjerker.
No. Oh, I apologize. I did not mean to step on you there, Rob.
It's okay. I'm used to being stepped on. You can't scare me.
But yeah, his autobiography, A Most Extraordinary Ride, Space Politics and the Pursuit of the Canadian Dream. So you can learn more about him there.
Okay. Let's go to a break and we'll be right back. And we are back with Casey Drier, who is the Chief of Space Policy for the Planetary Society. So Casey, before we go anywhere, and great to meet you. I've been following you for years, but I don't think we've met face to face. What is a Chief of Space Policy and what do you do?
I'm the guy who has to figure out how to get all of our space policy goals done, or at least advanced at the society. So that means the search for life, supporting planetary defense, things like promoting space science and exploration. I do a lot of the strategy. I'm the data guy too. So I do all the budgets, analyses, and tries to figure out why things work the way they do. And then I work with colleagues who are based in Washington, D.C. to execute on that plan. So try to push that forward. So really trying to carry forward the goals of the Planetary Society and its members in a strategic and functional way in the guise of a nonprofit, right? So all we have really working for us are our words, our members, our ability to persuade. And so, yeah, it definitely keeps me busy.
Well, and I'll say from the position of a person who's moderately highly placed in the National Space Society, we admire your work and envy your budget.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Really quickly, we should probably ask Casey just to give our listeners like a very quick idea of what the Planetary Society is. And then Casey, I usually ask people how they got involved in space. So if you've got like a little bit of a window into where your interest got into that, and for Planetary Society to give us a primer, that'd be great.
Certainly. So Planetary Society, for those unfamiliar, it's a nonprofit organization founded by Carl Sagan back in 1980. Since 2011, I believe, Bill Nye, science guy, erstwhile science guy, has been the CEO. I've worked there since 2012. And we are a public membership organization. That means pretty much anyone in the world can be a member of the Planetary Society, and that keeps us independent. So we don't take government money. We don't represent professional interests. We don't take big aerospace money. We are, in a sense, that try to be the public representation of space in this arena. And advocacy and policy is one of the ways in which we do that. We do a lot of outreach education. We do projects. A few years ago, we designed, built, funded, and launched the only successfully crowdsourced satellite, LightSail 2, which demonstrated solar sailing in a CubeSat. So we all do a variety of types of things. I think it's a pretty fun and unique organization to be a part of. And we really believe in the kind of the scientific side of exploration. So scientifically driven exploration that expands, not just it finds and does exciting things, but really pursues that kind of Sagan-esque vision of a enlightened and kind of emotive feeling, right? Almost a spiritual aspect of going and discovering something bigger than yourself. And that's been, I think, a really important perspective to present at this point in time in space history. You want my story? I kind of feeds into that.
I'm just curious how you got involved in space. Yeah.
I mean, I was certainly the kind of kid who would like scribble and when I was 3 years old and call things a rocket. And my parents say they never knew how I even learned that word. But I thought I wanted to be a scientist until I tried to do science in college. I have an undergraduate degree in science, but I realized, this is really hard.
Hey, Tariq, he's one of us.
One of us.
So I did the next best thing and I married a professional scientist and got involved on some of the Mars missions. I went and saw my first launch, the Curiosity rover in 2011. And, you know what that's like. I mean, Tariq, I've seen you. We've met there, but for anyone who hasn't been to a launch, right? You're at Kennedy Space Center. You're surrounded by rockets. This hallowed ground of all these, past history of space flight exploration highlights, and it feels like hallowed ground, and all of these old feelings as a kid started coming back. It's like, oh my gosh, this is like the most amazing stuff. And then I saw the rocket launch. And nothing prepared me for it, right? For all of you who've seen it in person, compared to what it's like on TV, where you have the staid NASA announcing, all right, now we have liftoff on successful mission going to go. They always are so like monotone. But you're there in the crowd, and I was sitting with all the scientists and engineers on this mission, and you could feel as we're counting down, it wasn't just a countdown, the tension was rising, right? Inversely proportional to how close we were to zero in terms of this countdown. And so thick in the air, and then suddenly it launched, and it just like shoots up right off the ground. This is an Atlas 541, so it had a lot of these solids that really pushed it off the ground fast. And the whole crowd just lost their mind, completely lost. All that stress and tension just exploded out of the crowd, and it was the very close. Again, it's like to a spiritual experience. You have this transformative moment where you just feel something so powerful and profound, and all of that, to like go to this little red dot in the sky and say, what's going on there. And that was that night after a couple of tequilas. It's like, I need to work for the planetary. I want to do something for the Planetary Society, and that kind of started my journey to that.
Wow, well, very different story.
Kudos on having a much smarter in than Tariq and I did. Marrying a Mars scientist or a space scientist is smart. I wish I had thought of that.
My wife is a zoologist.
Yeah, she gets to do all the hard work, right? And I get to
you get to tag along for the good times. I'd seen a couple of shuttle launches, which were also big and noisy, and then I took my kid when he was about 8 to see a shuttle launch. We waited and waited. I mean, we literally sat in Kissimmee for a week waiting for this thing, or Titusville, to take off, and it just wasn't happening. So instead, I took him to the beach in Titusville that kind of curves down closer to Kennedy for an Atlas launch. And, it's a smaller rocket, right, with much smaller solids. And I thought, well, it'll be kind of a pale comparison to the shuttle, but that's okay. At least we'll see a launch. I think it might have been because it was a cloudy day, because that changes the acoustics, but it was so loud. He was terrified. It was
because the sound bounces off the bottom of the
so
clouds.
I'm looking at my kid feeling bad for him, thinking I should comfort him, but I was enjoying the launch too much. So I just said, suck it up, kid.
Well, I mean, it's a physical experience. I think this is like why you get so many people who kind of make these pilgrimages to Starbase or SpaceX. And, you have these almost like shantytown encampments now that are watching these daily launches. And it's just a really physical aspect. It's the most physical aspect of it. And it's overwhelming, right? That sound hits you and it resonates in your chest, and you think it can't get any louder. And then it does. And you realize how much work the cameras are doing with a dynamic range adjustment on the flame coming out of the back of the rocket. In person, you almost can't look at it. And I think that visceral experience is such an important aspect of balancing out with what generally is such an abstract experience, right? Because for the most part, one does not go with the rocket into space. And so that is your physical connection to the entire endeavor, is watching something launch, something that goes, and maybe it's something also like really deep about being some evolved animal on Earth with some intuitive sense of, Newtonian physics, right? Things, we can all anticipate arcs and catch things in the air. But to see something that goes up and then doesn't come back, right?
That's a really interesting
deep,
point.
Profound level. It's like,
and
that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah. And to a similar extent,
Falcon,
I was going to say, to a similar extent, if you see like the space station overhead, if you're like one of the spotters, people see it and they're like, oh, pretty dot. And then you think there's 7 people living in that dot right now.
Yeah.
And then, some people I might have met, that kind of thing.
And I'm the only person in the room who can say what it was like to look at the moon and realize there were 2 guys walking around up there.
Yeah.
Right.
That was truly transformative.
Sure.
Okay.
But all of that was done.
Do we have to talk about the unfun stuff now?
I was going to say, that's great stuff. You want to go to a break or?
I want to go to a break so he can talk about the budget. Because
that's what I was going to say. I was going to do like a lead in and a big thrower, but
okay, do a throw to the break because you never get to do those.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, like, so all of that great stuff that we've talked about, that inspirational part.
No, that's wrong. Sorry, go ahead.
Wow.
Yeah.
Casey, thank you very much. I think you've put the wonder right up front, but it all came from this effort of international exploration, a national focus with NASA, and of course that takes funding for both the science, for the space flight, for all of it, and that's what we really wanted to start, getting into, because there's some stuff I think our listeners and your supporters need to know, and we're going to do that right after this break. Yeah, so like you said, Casey. Now we brought you to talk about probably like one of the less fun
at the moment, for sure.
At the moment, things, and that is just kind of what's going on at NASA. In fact, I saw that that you and the team at the Planetary Society call this the dark age of NASA science. If this budget request that has come from the White House gets realized, and of course, a lot of this was released in detail. We had a skinny budget before late last week, so it's still extremely fresh. And it's really bad news. Cuts NASA's budget to, I think, the lowest since the 60s. Is that right? Casey, do you want to kind of paint the picture for why we're in a bit of a danger zone for NASA science right now? Absolutely.
So the budget that was proposed, we knew the top lines about a month ago. And what we got was the full, what's called congressional justification. So the detailed, here's what we're going to do with this money. And as you go through this, and this is the full kind of mission by mission detail. So this is all the grisly details now of losing a quarter of your budget in 1 year, which is what happens to NASA overall. And then with, of course, it's not applied evenly. It's half of that, or the primarily paid for by cutting science in half. And so, you cut science in half, a lot of bad things are going to happen. So yes, the big picture thing. So we can look at a couple of big and smalls, right? So assume this goes through, or at least in terms of proposal, this will be NASA's smallest budget, adjusted for inflation, since fiscal year 1961. Fiscal year 1961 began in July of 1960. So this would predate human spaceflight.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this is a NASA that before, Shepard's first flight into space, before even Gagarin's first flight. This would be in terms of big, this is the biggest single year cut as a proportion of spending ever proposed by a White House. And that includes the years after Apollo, in which they were ramping NASA's budget down. The smallest, this also fires a third of NASA's civil service staff, which would leave NASA with the smallest workforce since fiscal year 1960, which began in 1959. So this is a NASA budget of really, again, shrinking and kind of narrowing of capability through both. You can just look at those top line numbers and putting it into historical context. Again, so talk about science. Science is cut in half. NASA has 5 science divisions: astrophysics, planetary science, heliophysics, right, sun science, earth science, and then microgravity and biological sciences. Basically pays for all the stuff they do on the space station, all the experiments. The cuts are not applied evenly, but functionally they're all cut anywhere between 80% in terms of microgravity science to a mere 30%, which is planetary science. But astrophysics in particular loses about 2/3 of its budget in a single year, which is kind of astonishing when you think about how successful it's been, right? That's your Hubble, that's your James Webb Space Telescope, that's everything. Yeah, right. It's astonishing. I mean, again, this would be NASA's smallest science budget since 1984. Which was a very, very different time for NASA science. It's a much smaller program. Earth science didn't even exist as an independent branch of science back then. So this would cancel 19 missions that are currently active and in space and producing good science. It would cancel about 18 NASA-led development projects for future space missions across all of those divisions. and it would cancel, multiple, all told about 41 active projects in development or in flight, which is roughly about a third of NASA's entire science project portfolio in a single year, right?
Wow.
And then even you extend it out, you look at some of the future projections, there's a lot of other ones that get turned off next year or the year after that. So this is a calamity, right? It's hard to.
Well, I was going to say, I've been playing catch up, Casey, since this budget came out. I went on a family trip. I came back. This was here. I've been trying to understand it. But from what you described, it sounds like a catastrophic budget proposal for NASA.
Yeah,
41.
Okay, so excuse me for a second, but look at this. If you're watching the video stream, look at this chart we have. Anything red is bad. Okay. So, and I just want to point out, you kind of alluded to it, but
oh my gosh,
there are people that will look at this and say, well, it's a good thing we're saving money. There's a lot of sunk costs in these programs, whether they've flown or not. There's a lot of money spent on them. And then you talk about something like Juno out of Jupiter. That's paid off. All we're doing now is minding the store and keeping the thing going and bringing the results down. So it's a really a false economy on so many levels. And then you get into the conversation about killing SLS after Artemis 3, assuming that actually lands in this decade. Yeah, it's $4 billion a launch, roughly estimated. That's a bad thing. Maybe Boeing can work on that a bit and the other contractors. But we've spent how much on SLS and Orion to date?
A lot.
I think it's edging up to $18 billion.
Yeah.
More than that, I think. It depends on which, and it depends on when you start counting. Tens of billions, let's say.
We start counting when Constellation started, honestly. That's fair.
Sure.
So 2004.
So that gets you up. Yeah, exactly. Is it for some of those? And I have those numbers somewhere just off the top of my head. I can't recall them, but certainly tens of billions. Yes, I think, and we can talk about the Artemis aspect and SLS and Orion. I'd say those are arguably the most defensible. At least you can defend it from a policy perspective, right? Just putting aside kind of the other stuff about it.
You mean by saying the word China to the administration?
Well, no, in the sense that they are very expensive, and clearly NASA has options with launch that, and you can you reformulate certain aspects of Artemis that way? Probably, right? And it's certainly very expensive.
Yeah.
But you do risk going into you breaking this what I would call the consensus that is enabling Artemis to survive. And but let's put that aside just a second. So I do want to talk. Let's focus on the science aspects, because again, that's all happening in the context of exploration actually going up in this budget with this ambitious new Mars program being added onto it, which again, without this context, would be generally exciting, but has functionally no real clear implementation. But again, so science. Let me just finish on the science thing. Please. Your point about operating missions. When a spacecraft launches, and generally any spacecraft, but particularly a science spacecraft, on average, that spacecraft in its entire life of what it will cost the taxpayer, 90% of that expenditure has been made by the time that it launches, right? Building it is the difficult and expensive part. Operating it, that's when you get all your benefit from it, and that's the cheap part. So you're right. Things like Juno, New Horizons, which is out in the Kuiper Belt, missions like Maven at Mars, you're talking about at most $10 to $15 million per year, often quite a lot less. And so you're saving very, very little money. You are going to end an irreplaceable or a unique asset that if you want to replace it would cost you a lot more money to build. And at the same time, there's to me this deeper symbolic part of something about us turning off these missions of exploration and letting those tumble into the blackness merely because we've asserted some tautological statement of, well, we can't afford these because we no longer are giving money to afford them. Is something very sad about what it hits me kind of a deeper level, right? That's not smart policy. It's not smart budgeting. And in the context, you are also, I should say, in this, you're breaking a lot of joint projects with particularly European partners and other international partners in this budget, right? So you're actually abandoning a number of efforts that we have made commitments to as a nation. The one that really gets me is the ExoMars Rosalind Franklin rover from the European Space Agency, which we had already broken a promise to the Europeans on 15 years ago. We pulled out of that one already in 2012. And that's what drove them to work with the Russians. They were getting ready to launch it, and then Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe pulled out of that agreement and was searching for how do we launch this thing. The US came back and said, we will provide you a rocket, a Falcon 9, some landing, some system support, maybe help you build a lander. And this budget cancels that commitment again, right? So it's something about this, like the second time pulling the rug out from under the Europeans on that project. At a Mars mission for nominally Mars as being a goal is just, again, it's bad policy. It's a short-sighted decision, and it undermines a lot of these goals. So
you're talking about
this is a
human Mars mission, right? That plan?
For their new human Mars initiatives. Yes, they say that they want to do that. While at the same time, they're saying like, as a consequence, we need to build telecom relays and all these other infrastructure at Mars, while they cancel Maven, which is a telecom relay spacecraft at Mars right now that you're getting pennies on the dollar to operate. So again, there's a lot of self-contradictory stuff in there, which I think belies the fact that this budget was not thought through at all. And for the most part, we know that the dollar amounts were set arbitrarily first. NASA was not part of the decision, or their input was not requested when this came together. And NASA is now frantically trying to figure out what to do with these new initiatives that they're being told to do. But the money they do even request for this human initiative to Mars, no studies have been done for that. No trade studies, economic studies, no industry input. 2 months ago, they were going to the moon. And so they don't know if even the money they're asking for is enough to do anything, if there's a market to support these types of things. Again, it's a profoundly bad strategy and policy. Even if you want to do these things they say they want to do, you would not do them like this if you want them to succeed.
And to your point about human spaceflight to Mars, among other problems, and we've talked about on the show before, we have things like life support systems that are expected to last at least 7 months before shutting off and killing you. And radiation mediation. I've seen no work out of SpaceX even approaching that, and that's going to add a lot of weight to that spacecraft and refueling flights and so forth. They canceled Mars sample return because it was too complex and over budget. And what was driving one of those cost increases in that project was that it had to land a lot of mass, the largest mass ever put on Mars. And so your entry, descent, and landing EDL stuff was all novel and new and couldn't be reused. This budget cancels MSR and then calls for hundreds of millions of dollars to be spent on a human-rated EDL demonstration project in the next few years, and says that humans will pick up rocks anyway. Right.
Adding humans to spaceflight does not make things easier or cheaper. I'm sorry to say, that is the reality of it. So again, it's that kind of internal contradictory system, but also maybe they could have been more clever, right? Can Mars sample return and this human Mars initiative? It seems like those can actually fit together if you think about it a little bit. So it's, again, a lot of this doesn't make sense. And it's because it was rushed and it was not led by a standard process. It's just the budgeting office saying, you get this because, and they had this budget, the budget numbers, particularly for science, were called out years ago. The current budget director of the White House, Russ Vought, released his own alternative budget in 2022, where he said, we should cut NASA's science budget by 50%.
Right.
He's the budget director now. Lo and behold, what a coincidence, NASA's budget is cut by 50%.
And this does feel like budget by whim and tantrum. We're going to go to a quick break, and then we'll come back with Tariq's next question. Stand by, everybody.
Casey, one of the things in reading kind of all of the analysis and like the coverage about this budget rollout and the cancellations and some of the things that we've seen in the past, because in Trump's first term, there was a big cut, I think, on like 5 or 6 different Earth science missions, for example, and whatnot. Some of those ended up getting reversed. And I do recall during the prime missions for Spirit, not prime, the prime lifetimes of Spirit and Opportunity, there was a call to cancel those missions, even though they were working just fine. They hadn't gotten stuck in the dirt yet on Mars. They were just long in the tooth. And it was like, well, we could save that money and put it somewhere else. And there was an uproar from both the public and the science community about just those 2 rovers from one mission, the Mars exploration mission rovers at all. And then, of course, they went on, they made more discoveries, maybe even some of the biggest ones well after that point, and the rest is history. And so I'm looking at this list, and it's only a partial list. You mentioned 41 projects. We talked about Juno already, and Mars sample return, but New Horizons, that extended mission, which just barely got reapproved. Like last year, we had Alan Stern on the show to help call for that. And then it just seems like immediate backpedaling from that. The Osiris Apex extension, for planetary defense. That wasn't an Apophis flyby, right? I mean, that was.
It is.
It is. Yeah. Like the scariest asteroid out there, right?
Yeah. So, it is NASA's only Apophis mission. Again, that we're leveraging a pre-built spacecraft to do, right? That's the essence of efficiency, right? We're using it's there. It can do it. We don't have to build a new one.
You mentioned Maven, of course, and then Mars Odyssey, one of like the longest lasting planetary missions we've had going forever. And
absolutely.
The two Venus missions too.
Well,
and then all of Venus is wiped out, including U.S. contribution to Europeans' Envision Venus mission as well.
Well, and excuse me for breaking in, Tariq, but your points about the European Space Agency are well taken, because what part of their budget we're wasting with our waffling is a much bigger percentage of the money they get to spend than the U.S. budget. I mean, their space programs are tiny compared to ours. So when we back out of something and say, oh, sorry, yeah, we were just kidding about that launch thing, that's a huge hit for them. It's huge.
Oh, yeah. And Europeans, they lose out more than just on the science missions, right? Like the end of Orion is the end of their contribution for the European-made service module on Orion. The end of Gateway, which is canceled in this. Europeans had a major commitment on Gateway, including planning for their astronauts to be parts of those crews. They lose contribution opportunities on some of their missions, like Euclid, some future space telescopes, future Earth science missions. It's really, again, treating our partners very poorly in this process and not enabling, just not really filling our part of the bargain. These types of situations are going to make it harder for our partners to trust us in the future and to enable these types of joint activities, which is one of your big soft power international benefits. If you want a very practical, realpolitik benefit of spaceflight, is to make your alliances stronger with your allies and to demonstrate to your adversaries how strong and integrated your economies and alignments are with your supporters around the world, and to build new allies, right? By doing these types of joint projects. So it's just very foolish.
Pursuant to what you're saying, this also, especially with the Europeans, tends to pivot them back to China as a partner, because China tends to follow through on what they say they're going to do in 10-year increments. And there's a lot of people concerned about the geopolitics of that, not the least of which is the current administration, who's basically saying to those partners, yeah, go work with them because they'll follow through.
China is absolutely leveraging this opportunity to reach out to Europe and other developing space nations around the world to say, we are the reliable partner. You can trust us.
Is there just like a brain drain risk that you see here at the Planetary Society, just about the where you have a generation, I guess, of scientists that would come for these missions that have been canceled, right? Or engineers and whatnot, and then the ones that are working now, who, like you were just saying, if not just these other countries will see China or others as a more reliable partner, but the scientists that NASA would need to get kind of the basics done would find maybe like better prospects and more reliable, more exciting science to pursue there. I mean, we just had a story at Space about how the most recent China moon samples, for example, are being shared outside of NASA, right? But scientists in different universities are figuring out ways to be able to study them, but they have to go around NASA because of some of the political things there. But this seems like it would take that and just ramp it up to like a bajillion, because there would not be as huge
opening for them. And in addition to that, you have a number of kind of corresponding initiatives within this administration, obviously hitting science at a much larger context as well, right? So this is a broad omni crisis for American science, and you have fewer opportunities for new students. And even within NASA, we haven't touched on this yet, NASA's entire Department of Education and STEM outreach is eliminated in this. That's the very popular space grant program. Each state has a space grant office that gives thousands of dollars, like level of donation of support for students to do summer internships, for rocket clubs, for people to really start doing these types of scientific work. Again, I've seen this firsthand. My wife, again, as a planetary scientist, works at a state university. Being able to offer opportunities to work on active spaceflight missions is like a magnet for talented, ambitious students who have never seen a role for themselves maybe before.
That's right.
In space or in space engineering or in computing. And whether they stay in that industry or not, you're pulling these people, again, it's like this lighthouse effect. It draws people to you. So again, this is where, as we've characterized this idea that this is, even despite this claim that it's a big ambitious effort to go to Mars, it is a narrowing ultimately of ambition and scope of what we expect our space program to do. And in the consequence, this is a very short-sighted and ultimately self-destructive long-term process to abandon this and to close off so many opportunities for people to do it. And most of us have grown up in a world where we've had this kind of broader, not just science, but again, this kind of public-minded NASA that is in trying to represent the best part of ourselves in space. And I've been writing a lot about this idea that, a public space agency, the role for it that I see obviously is doing these unique activities, but it's also a potent symbol for a culture to project itself and its idealized values into the literal heavens, right? Like the symbolic value of that is really powerful. And this is why I think NASA has always been so serious about what it wants its astronauts to be, and what its spacecraft and opportunities for everyone in the nation to be offered to, that it's more than just a business doing this. It is the self-identity of our culture. And so what we do in space matters, and what we don't do in space also says something about this.
Well, and to follow up on that, I was telling people before we started, I was at a gathering of Apollo veterans over the weekend. And I was sitting with Flight Director Jerry Griffin and his daughter, who runs a space PR agency, and there are a few other people from that time and place there. When this news about Jared Isaacman came in, followed by the news, at least when I got it, that the recommendation was that they close the NASA Field Center public affairs offices and slim down the one at headquarters to a sliver, and privatize it. Now, is privatizing that effort something that it would certainly be different? I can't say that I'm convinced it would be better. It would probably be less expensive, but you're messing around here with one of the premier brands in history. NASA has always rated in global surveys in the top tier of brand recognition, of people having, it's a feel-good brand. People respect it. The conference that the National Space Society does every year, we generally get between 400 and 500 foreign students from both Asia and Europe, and they are NASA crazy. And it's because primarily of the public outreach efforts that NASA does through education and through their PAOs. So shutting that down and then having this gap while the private sector steps in, and it could become something good, or it could become what happened in National Geographic when Fox bought it, and suddenly we're having reality shows about, Orange County astronaut housewives or something. And it is not, I can't say I've got a great feeling about it. And I feel like we're squandering, you talk about soft power, we're squandering one of the largest soft power outreaches we've got.
Absolutely. I mean, that's true about the international, and it's true nationally too. Here in the United States, NASA is often the top or tied for the top most approved federal agency, usually with the post office, right? So it's even internally within the country, NASA is seen as widely respected and supported for what it does. And again,
it's hard to mention it in the same breath as the post office, but okay.
Well, I think it's just, people know the post. For all the, it sucks to wait in line sometimes, but you can send a letter for 50 cents or whatever it is these days, right? It's a place, it's the point of contact most people have with the government. And then something as frankly as esoteric seeming as what NASA does is kind of up there at the same time. It's the opposite, right? Most people do not have a direct point of contact with NASA, right? They take pride in it because of what it does and because of what it's doing on behalf of everyone. right? Not just a party or not just a subset of people. And that's a very easy point. It's a dangerous thing to play with. And I always think it's a luxury item to think that you can do that and mess with it so badly and it'll just continue. Again, we've all grown up with NASA as being in this unique position and mediating this relationship of the nation to space. Obviously, that's been changing with the growth of commercial space sector and private space, which I think is an interesting trend that we've been seeing over the last 10 to 15 years. That's probably an entirely different conversation. But this idea that NASA does represent something very positively seen by the nation and the world, that is a precious thing. Not many things pull that highly, right? I said, I don't even know if kittens pull that highly in general. And I mean, like, you don't see the Department of the Interior t-shirts flying off the shelves at the Gap, right? It's
that's a really
people
good
wear
point.
NASA logos,
Right.
What other government agency has its logo on t-shirts that people pay money to wear?
Bureau of the Budget.
Paid to wear it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do. We're going to do one more break, and then we're going to come back. Stand by.
Well, Casey, this has all been very disheartening, but informative, I think, for our listeners. And I guess that gets us to what might be one of the most kind of important parts of our discussion is, like, what can people do right now? I know that you and the Planetary Society are putting up a massive effort to try to get people involved and spread, I guess, awareness of how serious a step back from science and engagement and exploration this budget really is. But maybe for our listeners at home, or for people who maybe aren't in the United States but want to be involved somehow, like, what can you recommend that people should do to make themselves heard about this?
Yeah. So this is a budget proposal, and the U.S. Congress ultimately decides what is prioritized and spent, and also ultimately what U.S. policy can be through legislative vehicles called authorization acts. And so this is the time, if you've ever to get off the couch and do something, if you've always been unsure, this is the time to do it. And this is why I try to put those big numbers at the beginning. This is not your annual, it's going down 5 or 10%. I don't like that these handful of missions are cut. It's hard to be, it sounds hyperbolic, but hyperbole is appropriate right now, right? This is why I try to do. It's like, we have the data showing this is the most extreme radical shifts and cuts to what NASA has ever faced. There you go. And so at planetary.org, we have a petition that folks outside the US can sign, as well as people inside the US. If you live in the United States, we have phone call scripts. We have pathways you can use our forms to write your member of Congress. We have directions and tips on how to write op-eds for your local community. You can take my online Space Advocacy 101 course and get even better in learning about how the nuts and bolts of these processes work. And, so again, this petition you have up there, we're going to hand deliver that to the appropriators and submit it through official processes in order to have it entered into the record for the appropriations process, which starts in July. And so we have an opportunity to push back. And we have seen a lot of pushback from this. And so I'll emphasize, too, that this is not just the Planetary Society raising the alarm on this. We have, obviously, professional scientific societies, the American Astronomical Society, American Geophysical Union, and others raising that alarm. I think, really importantly, we have industry, and not just prime aerospace contractors, right? Those are upset, too. Commercial Space Federation. They have come out very strongly against this budget, right? This is because this is bad policy. There's a lot of bad policy in here. Even if there are a lot of initiatives to try to add more activities for the commercial sector, they see that through these scientific cuts, it'll drive up costs of components. It'll drive up costs for just fewer opportunities for these commercial companies to engage in. And I think, and this is something that's really important, this broader thing that I haven't had a chance to touch on, this idea of consensus. Orbital mechanics do not obey or aren't convenient for electoral politics timelines, right? So in the US, new Congress every 2 years, and we have a new presidential election every 4 years. This is President Trump's last term. And so someone else, and there's no way in which any humans will get to Mars by 2028. I think we can all be honest about that. I think even if SpaceX hasn't been having their exploding, Starship been exploding. It's been getting space. 2020 is wildly, wildly ambitious. So someone will have to carry this forward. And there right now is being zero effort being done by this administration to sell these radical changes, not even just for science, but for what they're shifting. They are functionally shifting Artemis to be boots on the moon, something, and then everything going into Mars, right? That is a huge change in policy. They are proposing lots of money down the line after canceling SLS and Orion, which is not popular with Congress, for all this Mars stuff. And they're not doing any effort to engage, not even their own members of the party, much less Democrats who are in the minority in Congress right now.
Well,
but Democrats won't always be in the minority.
And the signatories to the Artemis Accords. This puts them in a weird position too.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, like, this is the whole point of Artemis, why it was structured the way it does, is that this is a sustained effort to go to the moon, that we are not going to back away from this commitment. That was always seen as the key, not just for our international partners, but for commercial partners too. If you are a business trying to raise money to invest in this new cislunar economy, you need to be able to say to an investor, the US is going to go here for the next 3 decades. It will cost you some money now to build up this hardware and capability, but we will have contract opportunities to deliver payloads in perpetuity. That's where you make your money back. That's how it worked with the space station. That's why SpaceX could raise money. That's why Orbital Sciences at the time could raise money, because they knew on the back end, which ultimately was correct, they could make billions of dollars servicing these contracts for years. Now we're moving away. We're breaking that promise to them too with Artemis. And so we're actually making it harder for commercial companies to operate and do what we want them to say, we say we want them to do, which is to offset these costs of the taxpayer, because we are waffling, flipping around, and building no effort at consensus. No one believes the smart stuff will survive this next term, because particularly if they're destroying all these projects that are broadly supported in Congress, but also making no effort to build consensus among Democrats or even, again, Republicans in their own party. If you have a Democratic president, they are not going to carry this Mars program forward. So how can you raise money knowing that this will not continue after 3 years? This is the essence of waste and inefficiency, ironically, right? So even in the context of what they want to do, how they're doing it here is self-defeating and wasteful. This is why I can't emphasize how bad this is enough. Even if you support everything they want to do, how they're proposing to do this is disastrous in terms of breaking this consensus. Artemis was the first return to the moon program, right, that has ever survived a presidential transition, right? So you had Apollo, barely survived, arguably, into the Nixon administration. Any subsequent effort to send humans back to the moon died the next time a new president was elected. That trend ended with Artemis because, ironically, under Trump's first term, the people who implemented that policy knew this and specifically designed this to survive, to be a consensus-driven process, right? You had Jim Bridenstine out there building support among Democrats. You had Mike Pence and others in the National Space Council creating smart policy, good policy that was widely seen as valuable, which was not rescinded under the Biden administration. What else did Biden and Trump agree on? But Biden continued Artemis and handed it back to the Trump administration. So they are not doing anything like that with Mars.
If I recall correctly, that was the first time space efforts bridged administrations that successfully.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, the first time return to the moon program survived a presidential transition, much less one to the opposite party, and that was not a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, and you just name dropped Jim Bridenstine, Trump's NASA administrator at the time, as like the shepherd for that, naming the Artemis program, naming the Roman Space Telescope, which also got a pass, surprisingly, after being canceled. In a way, right? It's obviously
it's not dead, but it doesn't have the money it needs to succeed. It may just hit a budget overrun, and then that will be the justification. But yes, it's better than being outright canceled in this budget.
Right now, for all intents and purposes, this budget is somewhat a smash and grab, put out when NASA has no firm leadership or a figurehead that could do that kind of bridge work between the public, between industry, between lawmakers to keep something alive. And so it seems like it's very much a target of opportunity rather than any kind of policy at all that people should know about and complain to their lawmakers about.
Well,
right?
This is important because we're risking something that we've taken for granted. And if we destroy, if Mars even becomes a partisan issue, we are so screwed for those of us like me who want to see people get to Mars, right? There's no reason why any of this has to be a partisan issue. This could actually be a consensus building opportunity, as it was in the first Trump administration. And there's a reason why we choose our metaphors in our language, right? You said the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, generally, right, you can say is like when the Vandals came and destroyed Rome and smashed everything, and we lost that knowledge for generations. And we lived in this dim subsequent existence of vague memories of what was with no sense of what could be. And this is exactly what you said. This is a vandalistic activity that is happening here, destroying these incredible things that have been painstakingly built up over 70 years in the United States and elsewhere in order to make a point. We can't even necessarily speculate, but even again, what they say they want will not succeed because they are not putting the work in to make it succeed. And so at the end, you will have no moon program, no Mars program, no science program, and maybe even at this point, no commercial. What's your commercial customer base going to look like when there's no NASA to pay for it? And you will have, maybe space will just be things that are sent up and then point back down and just talk to, our internet. So great. We can talk to each other on the internet more efficiently. Joy. This is why this is like the big thing in the space world. And this is why we're so worried about this. And so this has to be rejected. And we're seeing that, and we're hearing from Republican offices too, that this is dead on arrival. But obviously, as some of you, and some of your listeners obviously know, that Congress is itself a somewhat dysfunctional body right now. And through inaction, a lot of this can still happen. And that's why we're trying to push as hard as we can.
Well, thank you so much, Casey. The Planetary Society, folks, if you're looking for an easy way, easy place to go, planetary.org. But as Casey mentioned, many other agencies, American Astronomical Society, Commercial Space Federation, just some of the places where you can look to try to get involved. Yeah, tons of resources on our website here. So you can learn more about this, go into detail. Don't have to take my word for it, right? To borrow a term. We have all of our charts, all of our data, all of our context and background, FAQs, and you can take actions.
And I do want to point out, Tariq, I'm only monitoring Discord, but this has been by far the most active discussion of
they're mad. Yeah, they are mad.
I find very heartening.
This is an
it's an abomination.
Well, it's been a long couple of months, right? But this is a taking something precious and just grinding it into the ground. And what a tragedy that would be.
And the excitement's not over.
Well, when this budget gets overthrown and a new and sensible one comes in, we hope, Casey, you'll come back to explain that one through it. And
I'm happy to talk about fun space stuff too.
Yeah.
I always tell when people hear my voice in the media a lot, things must be bad. I've been doing a lot of unhappy talks lately, but I also have fun things to think about space. So maybe some other time as well.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today for episode 164. Goodbye, NASA? ? Casey, we should all be tracking you and your work at the Planetary Society at planetary.org. Is there any place else or anything else you want us to look at?
My monthly podcast on space policy called the Space Policy Edition of Planetary Radio. That's part of the regular Planetary Radio feed, or you can just search for that online, and it's a special monthly feed for that as well.
And Tariq, where can we find you wringing your hanky as I am over all this?
Yeah, it's like 90 degrees in my office, everyone, if you're watching on the stream. So that's why I've been trying to dab a bit. You can find me at space.com, as always, on the Twitter, on the X, I guess, and Blue Sky at Tariq J. Malik. In a bit of lighter news, you can find me on YouTube at Spacetron Plays, because the big Star Wars live event is this weekend as we're recording it. But that is a very, very far remote from the stuff that matters, like we're talking about in this podcast here. So hopefully chronicling this whole development and improvement if your voices are all heard, everybody out there.
Fiddling as Rome burns. And of course, you can find me at astro.com and check out what I'm up to at nss.org. And you can, of course, if you wish, you can come find Tariq and myself doing a couple of episodes from now, this show live from the International Space Development Conference in Orlando in late June. And we welcome the hecklers, because I already know there's going to be a few in the room.
We should do it from the launch pad, right?
It's in We don't have time to get up there that Friday. It's from June 19th to the 22nd, and we'll be on that Friday, the 20th. And you can find more info on that conference at isdc.nss.org. I encourage you to come. It's actually a lot of fun, and we're going to drag Casey out there at some point because I don't think. Have you been to one?
I've been to the one in Los Angeles a few years ago. But I do have a toddler now, so my ability to travel is limited. But maybe she can come with me sometime because she's my future space advocate. So
you bet, and we'll be back in LA.
Start learning early.
We're back in LA in 2027, and I'm chairing that year while co-chairing with Pascal Lee. So
perfect.
We'll make room for you. And remember, you can always drop us a line at twis@twit.tv. That's TWIS@twit.tv. We welcome your comments, and at least I will answer your email, if not both of us. New episodes of this podcast published every Friday in your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, give us reviews, and all those other things, because we want to keep doing this. And who knows? NASA budget cuts might strike us someday. No, that's not going to happen. Don't forget, though, we're counting on you to join Club Twit in 2025 to help support the network and this show so we can keep bringing you great guests and horrid jokes. These electrons aren't free. We got to pay some overhead for them, so sign up. Annual memberships are back, and I don't know what the price is right now because I think we had a small increase, but it's still worth it no matter what. You can also follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook and twit.tv on Instagram. Casey, thank you. Thank you to everybody else with us.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great, and we'll have you back, and we'll see you all next time.